The procedure room in an abortion clinic is as sacred as any other space to me because that's where I am privileged to honor your choice. In this moment where you need something that I am trying to give you, God is meeting both of us where we are. Let's talk about Christianity and abortion. Hi, my name's Rachel, and today we're talking about being a pro-choice Christian. Specifically, I'm going to be going over this book, which is Life's Work, A Moral Argument for Choice by Dr. Willie Parker. I would put it on my shelves, but I'm going to be going through and reading a lot of quotes from it, so there's really no point. There's a part of a granola bar on my bookshelves because I have children, and that's just indicative of my life as a mother. I have several pages, so this is going to be fun and super forever taking. Let's talk about Christianity and abortion. So Dr. Willie Parker is a abortion providing OBGYN and a Christian. He's an author, and this is his first book. He's also coming out with a book on toxic masculinity. I'm super excited for that. He grew up in Christian fundamentalism. He is currently a Christian, not so much a fundamentalist anymore, but he talks about his being a Christian within this book, and he makes the case within it that being a Christian and being a pro-choice advocate are not mutually exclusive. In fact, he comes at it from the perspective that his faith complements his pro-choice values. So I'm going to be going over that as well as other parts of the book, and then I'm going to be interviewing, well, I already interviewed them. Then I'm going to switch over to the part of the video where I have interviewed several pro-choice Christians, some of whom you may recognize from the booktube community. I wanted to do this video because so much of this topic, abortion, is seen as very left and right, and it's similar to American politics in that way, in that you're either on this side or you're on this side. There's no nuance. And not only does it lack nuance, but it leaves out the perspective and the experiences of actual people. The typical framing of the abortion debate is that here on the left, you have pro-choice, atheist advocates of abortion who are typically Democrats, and on the right you have very much anti-choice, though they refer to themselves as pro-life, which I refuse to call them that. Religious Republicans, but that's not always the case. Those are just the loudest parts of the arguing, and I think that somewhere in the middle are people whose perspectives are still important and they get left out. So I think that it's time, and I wanted to use my platform for this, to uplift voices of Christians who are pro-choice and who believe in giving uterus-having persons agency and choice, because so much of the conversation is dominated by anti-choice people of faith, and I'm tired of hearing from them, and I would really like to hear from my friends whose perspective on faith complements their pro-choice values. So first of all, I loved the book. 5 stars, though I always feel weird about giving nonfiction stars, but it got 5 stars. I found it to be informative, enlightening, hopeful, and in parts kind of encouraging. There's so much that I didn't know about the pro-choice movement that he talked about, and I just found them to be so encouraging. So before I talk about how Dr. Parker's faith complements his pro-choice values, I want to talk about other things that he touched on in the book that I found very important and informative. Some of these being science, history of the abortion debate, poor women and perpetuating cycles of poverty, growing up fundamentalist Christian, racism, anti-choice legislation, the importance of work that OBGYNs who perform abortions do, like the actual reasons why it's important that they know how to do this work, know how to do it well and properly, and then do so. And something that I've never heard of before, a coalition that existed both past and present of different clergy and religious leaders to help uterus-having persons get abortion care that they need, which is amazing. So I want to talk about some of that stuff. This is probably going to be a long video, so please get some tea and some popcorn or whatever your things of choice to imbibe are, and settle in. You can always speed me up to 2 speed if it's too long, but yeah, I expect this is going to be long, but I did a lot of research. I did take a lot of notes, and I really want to touch on things in this book because even though it's not a very long book, it's pretty slim as far as books go, but stay. It is just chock full of information. Shit. Okay, I guess the first topic that I want to touch on, at least that's what's on my notes, is him talking about poor women who live in poverty, and the miscarriages of justice that happen to poor women who live in poverty, particularly women of color living in poverty, and how reproductive rights fits into that, because this is an intersectional feminist issue. So he, the author, Dr. Willie Parker, actually grew up in poverty with a single mother, and that really affects how he sees the world now, and it's absolutely foundational for why he does what he does, which is providing abortion care to people in need in some of the most poverty-stricken areas of the country. Okay, so I'm going to get into reading quotes, so you should settle in. This is from page 75. I think it's easy to misunderstand or to gloss over what it means to be poor. $500, which is approximately what a first-time surgical abortion costs, may not seem like a lot of money to some people, but the facts of my life help me to understand at the level of my bones just how much it can be. The 24, 48, and 72-hour waiting periods, the period of time between an initial visit to the clinic for counseling and the abortion counseling, I need to put that in quotes because and the counseling and the abortion appointment enacted by 27 states since 2010 have increased the burden on, okay, so it says women, he doesn't really talk about non-binary individuals or trans men in this at all, ever, who also have uteruses and can also face unwanted pregnancy. So I'm going to fix his quotes to include them, because I wish that he had done that, so I'm just gonna fix them because I'm not going to leave anybody out that's shitty. Have increased the burden on uterus having persons who want to terminate their pregnancies by failing to provide them financial support. Every day or week a poor person delays the procedure, the cost of that increases, not theoretically but in real terms, and not having money is likely the main reason they want an abortion in the first place. In 2015, Think Progress, a website affiliated with the Center for American Progress, calculated the cost of an abortion to a woman living in a rural part of Wisconsin if you factor in the gas, hotel, childcare expensive, and the lost hours of work necessary to abide by the state-mandated 24-hour waiting period. The bill, including the cost of the first trimester abortion itself, came to $1,380. For a pregnant person who doesn't want to be pregnant, government and establishment structures and systems do not open doors. They close them. They stand in their way, forcing them to pay more, not less, to claim their own future. As a young, poor African-American man with an appetite for achievement, I was able to seize opportunities provided me, imperfect and scarce as they were, to become a doctor. But for a young pregnant person who happens to be unintentionally pregnant and living in Alabama or Mississippi or Texas or Indiana, there are no such gateways. Worse, by enacting legislation that forces them to wait, and by making it ever more difficult for abortion providers to do their jobs safely and without trauma or risk to themselves, the states are actively denying them their future and thus their humanity. He worked at a OBGYN clinic, a women's health clinic it was called, in Hawaii, and he talks about how this was particularly a place that provided care to poor women, and talks about seeing the new doctor that came in and was in charge of the clinic abuse their power by denying poor women abortion access, meaning that these women had to go somewhere else for care, and that's horrible. How could we reasonably say that our care of poor women was non-discriminatory? I could no longer defer my ethical engagement. I believe that Dr. Sweet was changing the rules as a prerogative of his power. I felt that our patients were entitled to abortions if they wanted them. Queen Emma Clinic represented an ideal of integrated care for women who were abjectly poor. I didn't realize how ideal until I saw how they would suffer under this change. They were at the Queen Emma Clinic because they had nowhere else to go. To me, it wasn't acceptable to deny them a safe and legal procedure. And this injustice was a catalyst for him, because up to this point he had sort of remained neutral. Even though he was an OBGYN, he existed in this sort of ambiguous place that was neither pro-life nor pro-choice. Of this he says, but I was complicit with anti-abortion forces in that I did not place myself on the front lines. Because silence is a choice. Not doing anything when you can do something is a choice. It was after this issue in Hawaii that he realized that he was not helping poor women. In fact, he was hurting them by not helping them. get the care that they were asking him to provide, and therefore not a neutral action at all, and as such, it was not in line with his faith values. Poor children are raised without so much more than material things. They are raised without a clear sense of their own horizons, but rather with a systemic suppression of possibility and a literal lack of access to pragmatic information about how successful people get things done. Poverty is an onerous burden, and not just because of how material need, not enough food, not enough income to cover the bills, no secure housing, or easy access to sex education or birth control afflicts individuals and families. People living in poverty are treated as second-class citizens in this country, deprived in a generalized way of the respect and compassion that should be accorded to every human being. So he became an abortion provider, and he still does this work. Unfortunately, he still sees them struggle because the legislation from anti-choice legislators tends to affect poor people the most. According to data from Planned Parenthood, more than a third of women having abortions in the second trimester said they delayed because they needed time to raise the money. He then talks about seeing a woman who she exceeded the ban on abortions by 1 day, so she was 1 day off from being able to get abortion care. And the best that he could do for her was to say, well, you can drive 3 hours to Tuscaloosa, where the ban is not as strict as here. And so basically, and he says this here, she was penalized not just for being poor, but because she lived in the wrong zip code. So this woman who already had to take time to raise the money, and that's why she was late getting to her abortion, ends up not being able to get her abortion and then possibly has to drive 3 hours. How's she going to raise more money to get there? And this is what we do to poor people when we restrict abortion access. And people, well, anti-choice people do not want to help these women. Financial assistance does not exist for this. And that's why the Hyde Amendment exists. Contrary to popular belief, the Hyde Amendment is not a federal law, it is a rider attached to every appropriation bill since 1976 that prohibits the use of federal money for abortion except in the cases of rape or incest or to save the life of a mother. The Hyde Amendment bars poor women from using Medicaid, their government-funded health insurance, to pay for abortion. In this way, it targets America's most vulnerable citizens, the 1 in 5 women of reproductive age who live in poverty, by forcing them either to find cash they don't have in order to terminate a pregnancy or to raise a child they don't want and can't provide for. He then goes on to talk about 2 cases he saw in which the women fell under the exceptions for threat to women's health. So they pleaded their case to try to bypass the Hyde Amendment so that they could get Medicaid to cover their abortion care because they couldn't afford it, and their pregnancies were a threat to their health. And in the first case, they were able to get a bypass, but in the second case they weren't. And of this he said, in the end, Medicaid agreed to pay for abortion in the first case, but not in the second. The standard by the medical panel was risk of imminent death, and I remember dwelling on the absurdity of that. How close exactly does a woman need to be to death before the government allows her to get the medical support she needs? And more than just the Hyde Amendment, he actually goes on to talk about the history of the abortion war in the U.S. Until the 1980s, abortion was seen as a political, legalistic issue and not a religious one. George H.W. Bush was a long-standing supporter of Planned Parenthood, having sponsored and supported Title X public funding of contraception for indigent women right up until 1980, when he was considered as a vice president to run on the Republican ticket alongside Ronald Reagan. The right to safe and legal abortion appealed to Republicans because it went along with certain cherished conservative ideals: freedom from government, intervention in personal decision-making, and freedom to pursue the American dream, giving each individual the opportunity to design their own future. Basically, religious zealots teamed up and basically took over the whole politics thing and made Ronald Reagan their poster boy for anti-choice values under this disguise of the importance of the American family. Anti-abortion politics became in an instant part of a sweeping traditional worldview focused first and foremost on overturning Roe. But it wasn't just Roe, the moral majority, and their allies also hated homosexuality, single parenthood, pornography, feminism, and legions of other secular ills. The antis reached back into their Bibles and discovered their proof for their anti-abortion beliefs, most notably a previously obscure verse from the book of Jeremiah, which seemed to say a person existed in utero even before conception, even before the union of sperm and egg. Before I formed you in the womb, this is the verse. I knew you, before you were born, I set you apart. This understanding of conception is a religious understanding, but it promulgated widely as a secular truth. Almost overnight, pulling the lever for the Republican candidate became the Christian way to signal a vote for life and for the way the God of the Bible said he wanted things to be. Millions of Christians flocked to the polls, electing Ronald Reagan in a landslide. Their secondary but no less explicit motive to put a pro-life president in the White House who would appoint Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe. He also talks about legislation in the United States on abortion throughout the years and how this affects people who are in need of abortion care. You might recognize this guy. I cannot stand him. He's the current Vice President of the United States and is basically Voldemort. In 2016, in order to stop abortion clinics from providing fetal material to research facilities, the state of Indiana passed a bill signed into law by Governor Mike Pence, requiring all fetal remains to be treated like dead people and cremated or buried in accordance with the law, even if the woman who stopped the abortion has no desire or wish for such a right. I'm pretty sure that this also extended to people who have miscarriages, so that would have meant that if I had miscarried the times that I miscarried, which was twice in the state of Indiana, Mike Pence would have wanted me to abide by his stupid rules and basically treat my miscarriages like dead people, even though that's not what I would have wanted. I don't like him. So I talked about this before. Viability is the standard set by Roe, but states enact their own rules and don't abide by that. And what they do is they end up writing rules that basically prohibit a woman from getting an abortion even before the point of viability. One of the ways that they do this is to enact trap laws, which is targeted regulations on abortion providers. The proponents of these trap laws say they are looking after women's safety, but by forcing women into corners, both logistically and emotionally, the anti-choice people are creating an environment that is drastically unsafe. 20% of the abortions in the United States are medication abortions, and that has been rising. But with their trap laws, the anti-choice advocates are doing everything they can to block access to this type of abortion too. Abortion rights activists envision a world in which women who live in a country with no abortion provider or who are barely able to keep up with their childcare and work responsibilities might get a consultation with a physician on Skype and then receive remotely a prescription for mifepristone. To block that access, the Alabama state legislature passed the Women's Health and Safety Act of 2013, which forbids the use of telemedicine to prescribe prescription drugs. The state of Mississippi has the same rule. Wide availability of mifepristone is an anti-choice advocate's worst nightmare because it could allow women to terminate their pregnancies in private in consultation with their doctors without ever having to enter an abortion clinic. If growing numbers of women continue to decide on medication abortions at home, then the anti-choice advocates will have nowhere to picket and no fences on which to hang their gruesome signs. So many of the laws that are written are weirdly infantilizing of women. They treat them basically as children, as if they are completely incapable of making their own medical decisions. And they act like they are somebody who is so easily taken advantage of, and that's what these abortion providing doctors are doing, is taking advantage of people who are asking for abortion care. And they act as if these women are somebody that need to be protected, but they just want abortions. And while sometimes there are people who are pregnant who are being pressured into getting abortions by partners or by parents, and he does talk about this within the book, the vast majority of people wanting to get abortions do not feel this way. The pregnant people who are matter-of-fact or stoic as they undergo this procedure far outnumber those who are anxious or tearful. These people are used to blood, they see it every month, and most of them have been through labor. Many of the humans appalled by these visceral realities are the legislators who retain an unscientific squeamishness about uterine blood and physical discomfort. These happen to be mostly the males of the species. He goes on to speak about this later in the book, saying, "Abortion is the only personal decision that is subjected to this level of government oversight. More states require waiting periods before obtaining an abortion than for buying a gun or getting married. Adults are presumed to be able to look after their best interests and the best interests of people who are depending on them. In every case except abortion, society bestows upon individuals this trust, even if those individuals have demonstrated that they cannot be trusted to make good decisions. The presumption undergirding abortion decision-making is that women who have had sex and are accidentally or unintentionally pregnant can't be trusted to comprehend the consequential weight of their actions. The law requires them, like bad little girls, to prove to authorities that they have thought carefully about what they're about to do. And it was not always like this in the US. The first anti-abortion laws were enacted in the middle of the 19th century to prevent women from buying and drinking poisons peddled to them by charlatans, and not just because jurists had any opinion about the so-called rights of an early stage embryo or fetus. But this falsehood that life begins at conception has become so commonplace in our culture as to seem, even to certain supporters of abortion rights, as self-evident. So what he's saying there is, even people who are pro-choice sometimes feel like life begins at conception, and I think that even a lot of pro-choice Christians feel that way, but there's really no scientific basis for that. Nobody can say with certainty when life begins. But now we have laws written not based on science, but what the moral majority believes and wants everyone else to live under. Laws in Missouri and Kansas say that life begins at conception. Bills proposing that fetuses are people have come before legislators in at least 28 states. Thankfully, none have passed. This is the struggle that we reproductive rights advocates face, watching religious zealots abuse their power increasingly, just running all over separation of church and state by trying to legislate and use the law to control the bodies of uterus-having persons. To paint a clear picture, the 14 states that have passed 20-week bans since 2010, a woman carrying a fetus with a strong heartbeat but afflicted with a condition that consigns it inevitably to death immediately upon birth, as in the fetus has no chance of life after exiting the womb, cannot choose to legally terminate her pregnancy. Since 2008, when an advocacy group called Personhood USA was established, an avalanche of bills perennially come before state legislators proposing to write fetal personhood into law, an unconscionable, immoral waste of time and taxpayer dollars. In 2016, personhood bills were introduced in Alabama, Colorado, Mississippi, Rhode Island, Iowa, Maryland, Missouri, South Carolina, and Virginia. The only state in which a bill has passed has been Kansas, which in 2013 affirmed the Pro-Life Protection Act, declaring that life begins at conception. No such bill has ever succeeded at the federal level. And again, these are bills that are made that affect everybody's lives, that are not based on science, and the only people who agree with them are religious zealots, but everybody has to live under them. That's a religious dictatorship, but I guess it's fine. It will not matter that abortion is the law of the land if fewer and fewer brick-and-mortar abortion clinics exist, shut down for lack of compliance to a million new arbitrary rules and restrictions. Increasingly, limited or no access to abortion is reality. 89% of US counties have no abortion provider at all. Nearly 40% of American women of reproductive age live in these counties. That means, on average, a woman has to drive 30 miles to a clinic, more than 50 if she lives in a rural area, and more if she seeks an abortion after 20 weeks. As governor of Indiana, Vice President Mike Pence signed into law a bill that bans abortion on the basis of diagnosed fetal disability and requires abortion providers to advise patients about perinatal hospice in the event of a lethal fetal anomaly. Perinatal hospice is not an established medical protocol, but a bundle of services invented by anti-abortion forces. What the antis want is for non-viable fetuses to live inside the uterus until they die of natural causes, which increases the risk of harm to the health of the mother, because every pregnancy becomes more and more dangerous as it progresses to term. I can attest to that. Both my pregnancies that went to term were like that. This same Indiana law is the one that requires a miscarried or aborted fetus to be buried or cremated, even against a woman's wishes. In Alabama, a 2014 law requires a minor who wants an abortion without her parents' permission to go to court, where the state can appoint a lawyer for the fetus. The judge in charge can delay or adjourn the case indefinitely, in effect causing the girl to time out of the legal abortion period, which in Alabama is 20 weeks post-fertilization. In recent years, 3 states, Arizona, Arkansas, and South Dakota, passed laws requiring abortion providers to tell women who choose medication abortion that they can reverse the procedure by taking high doses of progesterone. This is, simply put, not true, and I did talk about that in my Unpregnant video. That is based on a study by a pro-life family health doctor named George Delgado, and his entire study, I believe, was based on 5 patients, and then they tried to duplicate the study, but they had to stop because people were, I think, bleeding out? I don't remember exactly, but I know that the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology does not agree with that. It's not a confirmed thing. You cannot just take a bunch of progesterone after taking mifepristone and reverse the abortion. That's not how it works. But it's on the books that that's a thing because religious zealots are in power. That's awful. That's horrible. They don't care about pregnant people. They just care about religion. This is a pervasive problem. Lack of science or flat out medical falsehoods being used in legislation that controls people's bodies. It should be illegal. Science is important. There should be no bias. Before 22 weeks, a fetus is not in any way equal to a baby or a child. It cannot survive outside the uterus because it cannot breathe, not even on a respirator. Cannot form anything like thoughts. Up until 29 completed gestational weeks, despite what anti-choice advocates may say, the scientific consensus is that it cannot feel anything like pain. I tell women that having this abortion now will not impede their future ability to have children, as many as they want, as long as their fertility persists. I do not engage in or perpetuate any of the culture's sentimental notions about the primacy of motherhood in women's lives. I regard the meeting of a sperm and egg as a biological event, no less miraculous, but morally, qualitatively different from a living, breathing human life, imbued with sacredness only when the mother or the parents deem it so. My job as I see it is not to encourage or discourage women to have abortions, but rather to deploy my medical expertise in the service of their free choice, whatever that may be. And that's what all the laws should be doing too. It should be focused on agency, choice, making sure that doctors are well trained, not based on things that we feel might be true but have no basis in science. And yet somehow anti-choice advocates in power base all of these laws and pass all of this legislation just based on lies. Despite the empirical evidence given by science and not contradicted, anti-choice advocates continue to disseminate their own version of the truth, which is to say lies and to pass laws that support an entirely false idea about what fetuses in utero can feel. Of the 22 states that ban abortion after a certain number of weeks, 15 of them do so on the grounds that a fetus may feel pain. There's no scientific basis for that. Of the 35 states that require mandated pre-abortion counseling, 12 require the women to be given information about the fetus's capacity for pain, and in some cases, offer fetal anesthesia, despite the fact that there is no established medical protocol for fetal anesthesia during an abortion. It is not a thing that doctors do. Chapter 9 of this book is called Black Genocide and the White Majority. If you don't already know, there is a conspiracy theory started and perpetuated by anti-choice white people in an effort to see abortion as an assault on Black people, as a Black genocide. So I'm just going to read through what he says about chapter 9 because he knows more about this than I do, and he says it a lot better than I ever could. So I don't feel like I need to give any thoughts on it. He lays it out real well. The Black Genocide movement positions Planned Parenthood as the main perpetrator of this genocide and the birth control pioneer Margaret Sanger as its primary architect. The Black Genocide movement is nothing more than a conspiracy theory pretending that abortion is a white plot to kill Black babies, and that by raising this awareness in Black communities, it is protecting millions of Black lives from slaughter. Because poor women and women of color have less access to reliable birth control and health care, they are more likely than privileged people to have unplanned pregnancies. They are also less likely to have taken comprehensive sex education in school. Women of all races and socioeconomic groups cite multiple reasons for seeking an abortion. Lack of financial resources, relationship instability, more children at home. But this multiplicity of factors disproportionately afflict poor women and women of color. The Black Genocide movement is a trumped-up play to gain political advantage. Cynically disguised as civil rights, it targets the most vulnerable women and pits their pregnancy against their own self-interest. In doing so, the Black Genocide movement only serves to compound the misery of people who are already living in circumstances of pain and deprivation. He talks about these people, these white people who perpetuate this idea of abortion being Black genocide. They will pay to put up billboards. It says one of them he saw running through mainly African American neighborhoods in Atlanta and New York. One of them had a gigantic photograph of a beautiful African American child. It said black children are an endangered species. Another said the most dangerous place for a black baby is in the womb. A third had a picture of President Barack Obama, and read, every 21 minutes our next possible leader is aborted. He says these signs prey on Black women's traditional sense of responsibility to their community and imply that they have some kind of higher duty, higher than to themselves, to continue a pregnancy, which is so manipulative and disgusting of these people to do. In 2009, a white pro-life filmmaker named Mark Crutcher produced a documentary-style propaganda piece called MAFA 21, which equates abortion by Black women to slavery and the eugenics experiments of the first half of the 20th century. Positioned as a civil rights film, it quickly circulated widely among various African American groups. I watch a lot of pro-choice videos just to kind of, see what updates are on laws and things. And in any one of them that you find on YouTube, you will find at least one, but probably more, comments on how Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist and how abortion is Black genocide, and they will tell you go watch MAFA 21, which, this is just really pervasive and disgusting. I will say that it's mostly white people, white men in particular, that I see doing this, saying go watch MAFA 21. Now when I see a patient in the clinics where I work and I sense that she's wavering based not on her own inner voice but because of some propaganda she encountered somewhere, I try to rebuild her self-esteem and her dignity. I tell her that her decision to care for herself is not in conflict with any duty she may or may not have to other people who look like her, and that the shame she feels is a product of outside forces who want her to feel this way. Sorry, I'm trying. This is the last part of this chapter I'm going to read, I think. Yeah, okay. Alright, let's get through this. Sorry, this really affects me. I just feel like this is just really manipulative and shitty to do to people who have uteruses. The truth, I am convinced, is that the people behind the Black Genocide movement, like Priests for Life and Life Dynamics, do not care about Black babies and Black women. They are often the same people who want to do away with public housing, who won't support state-sponsored childcare. Theirs is a famed concern. They are using women of color as pawns in a much bigger game, for they understand what too few of the foot soldiers in the abortion debate do. In abortion politics, all women are sisters, linked by their ability to bear children. If the antis can change the terms of the abortion debate, framing it as a systemic racism perpetrated by big healthcare institutions against Black people, then they can change the laws around abortion and no one will intervene, not even the white women who need abortions too. I really appreciate that he went over this because it's just one of the most disgusting tactics used by the anti-abortion community. It's hard for me to talk about, honestly. Another thing that he talks about is the importance of the work that abortion providers do, why it's important that they know how to do it well, and what it means for people accessing abortion care when there is no one qualified to give them this care, when there's nobody in their communities meeting this need. I know it probably feels like I'm reading the whole book, and I'm so sorry. There's just a lot of information. Abortion is never totally painless. It is physically uncomfortable, sometimes painful, and because of this, it's doubly important that patients continue to have not just legal access to safe abortions, but practical access as well. Doctors need to be trained in sufficient numbers to do abortion as quickly and painlessly as possible, while providing a maximum degree of compassion. Without that access, pregnant people will be driven to seek abortions from amateurs, or even to take matters into their own hands, which we saw in Texas, when Texas took away the ability to get abortions. And he talks about this more on 101, saying there are only 1,700 active abortion providers in the United States, and only about a third of them will do a procedure after 20 weeks. In the South, there are fewer than 10 doctors trained and willing to do the procedures. Part of the reason why there are so few abortion providing doctors is because it does put a target on their back. If you know who George Tiller is, he was a doctor who was murdered because he was an abortion providing doctor. There are people who will actively stalk, terrorize, threaten, and dox these doctors who are providing abortion care. 11 people, including 4 doctors, have, since the passage of Roe v. Wade in 1973, been assassinated for this work. Those are just the ones that have been killed. Those are not the ones that have been threatened or have been attacked but not killed. It's a problem. Decades of shootings and bombings and shouting and protesting has meant that the number of doctors willing to perform abortions has dwindled. In 1981, there were 2,900 abortion providers and only 1,720 in 2011, a 41% decline. And the number of doctors willing to admit they do abortions is even smaller. And hurting these doctors is so stupid on behalf of these anti-choice advocates because it doesn't lower rates of abortion and it doesn't help pregnant people at all. So are you really pro-life? No. No, you are not. It just harms these people in so many ways. One, because when there is no access to safe and proper abortion care, these pregnant people will go somewhere else. They will take their abortions into their own hands, or they will go to somebody who is not trained and not qualified, and this leads to the injury of millions every year and the deaths of tens of thousands, and that's according to the World Health Organization. Delays, dead ends, and restrictions lead women to start feeling desperate. It should come as no surprise that the number of do-it-yourself abortions is on the rise. In March 2016, a New York Times op-ed writer and economist named Seth Stevens-Davidowitz used Google to demonstrate a correlation between women seeking information on DIY abortion and restrictive laws passed by states. He looked at search terms such as how to have a miscarriage and how to self-abort, and found some 700,000 such Google searches in 2015. 8 of the 10 states with the highest search rates were also the states with the most restrictive abortion laws. Mississippi, with only 1 abortion clinic, had the highest rate of searches for DIY abortion. Shocker. In Texas, where the number of abortion clinics has dropped from 41 to 17 between 2012 and 2015, surveys found that between 100,000 and 240,000 women had attempted a DIY abortion, either by illegally requiring the abortion pill, mifepristone, or by taking the ulcer medicine, misoprostol. I should know how to say it, I've taken it before, which is easily available in Mexico, or by using herbs, homeopathic remedies, getting hit or punched in the abdomen, taking hormonal pills, alcohol, or illicit drugs, or experimenting with implements like coat hangers. It is not just the restrictive laws that account for this revision to the dark ages before Roe. It is the culture of shame and the hyped up punitive political rhetoric that causes pregnant people, especially religious observant pregnant people or pregnant people living in the Bible Belt states where these laws are likeliest to be enacted, to desire a level of protection and privacy that prompts them to take matters into their own hands. So he's saying it's not just the laws, it's the culture. People within religious communities don't feel comfortable even going to their doctors should they be able to get an abortion. That's awful. When qualified and compassionate doctors are not able to provide abortion care, either because they've been killed by anti-choice advocates or because they're just too scared to take up the job, or they don't want to because they're anti-choice themselves, people like Kermit Gosnell will take advantage of these pregnant people. Gosnell is in prison. He was a doctor who, I don't even know how to go into this. He had an abortion clinic where he had not been subjected to inspections in a long time, and he was just doing really despicable and disgusting things, and he is now in prison, and the world is better for him being in prison. I'm not going to go into what Kermit Gosnell did because honestly it's really sickening, and I'm nauseous just thinking about it. But the fact is that people like Gosnell exist, and they are made because we do not allow pregnant people to access abortion. Therefore, they get desperate and they end up going to people like Gosnell. Kermit Gosnell charged 25 to 40% less than the Planned Parenthood clinic less than 3 miles away, and some of the women who sought his care did so, they said, because they had nowhere else to go. They either could not afford the $500 fee that their Medicaid would not pay thanks to the Hyde Amendment, or they had delayed their decision until it was too late, and Gosnell would do abortions at any stage. Gosnell made himself indispensable because he was the last awful resort for young pregnant people who could not get permission from their parents or for people too poor to pay a legitimate doctor. At the age of 72, Gosnell received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Gosnell is what happens when abortion becomes too difficult to procure, and when the occupation itself, abortion provider, is something too socially disreputable for any young, idealistic doctor to undertake. There is no excuse for Kermit Gosnell, who was a criminal and an inhumane predator of pregnant people. But he is a boon to the anti-abortion forces because his heinous misdeeds tarnish all of us who do take this work seriously and do it skillfully and well. Doctors like Gosnell are able to emerge because the culture of intimidation scares the good, brave physicians away. In the aftermath of Dr. Tiller's death, abortion providers got collectively very, very nervous. They were forced very reasonably to search their souls and ask, is it worth it? Do I dare continue? This is why it's so important that people put aside personal feelings and help those in need. People with uteruses are in need of care. They're asking for care. They know what's best for them. They're asking for abortion care, and we need doctors who at least prioritize this care over their religion. And for Dr. Parker, his job is complemented by his pro-choice beliefs. He did grow up religious. He grew up under fundamental Christianity, and after seeing the abuse of power at the clinic in Hawaii, he found himself seeing this as a miscarriage of justice against people in need of medical care. Denying a person's medical care based on personal beliefs is to take away their agency, and it's basically denying their humanity and their right to choose. As an African American man descended from slaves and raised in the South, it is too easy for me to imagine what it's like to have no control over your body, your destiny, or your life. Less than 200 years ago, white men owned black people's bodies, and the Southern legislatures that represented those white men's interests protected their right not just to buy and sell humans as they pleased, but also to own the babies that black women carried even before those babies were born. White men maintained jurisdiction over black women's bodies in that they owned them and took possession of their babies. Insofar as abortion access is limited, this abuse of power extends to all women. I believe that the men who are passing the laws that limit medication abortion want to control women's bodies, which is not so far from wanting to own them outright. And he mentions that in a way, pro-choice Democrats sort of do this as well. And by that I mean take away pregnant people's agency. Instead of waging a righteous war on behalf of women and their constitutional rights to liberty and privacy, Democrats began to concede that abortion was a difficult, even tragic choice. In doing so, they threw Eve, as in Adam and Eve, under the bus again, turning reasonable adult women who saw abortion into victims awash in their own sad luck and bad judgment. Imagining that they could build common ground with social conservatives, Democrats began talking about a third way, using language that cast abortion as morally difficult and the women who sought them as agonized, fretful, and full of pain. Abortion is bad and the ideal number of abortions is 0, wrote the pro-choice columnist Will Salatin in a New York Times op-ed. This strategy completely ignored the historical facts. As long as women have been getting pregnant, they have searched for ways to become unpregnant. And for thousands of years, the methods they found were harmful to their health, causing infection, illness, and even death. And as a political maneuver, it backfired in incalculable ways, for all of a sudden a bipartisan moral consensus seemed to be emerging. If abortion is bad, then the women seeking abortion must also be bad, and new laws must be enacted to protect them from themselves. Which is why it's really important for people who are pro-choice to not have this idea that abortion is always this struggle, this harmful, this terrible thing. It is a medical procedure. Some people who are pregnant want to get it, and they have a right to get it. Point blank. Period. We don't have to project our feelings of how sad it is, how sad we are over it, onto other people, because they might not be sad about it. We only need to advocate for them to get the medical care that they need. Period. Giving pregnant people agency and choice is his main driving factor throughout the book. The dignity of pregnant people is the #1 theme. He talks about one woman he saw saying all her life this woman had been making decisions with her future in mind, and when I saw how consequential this one was to her, my resolve to do the work increased. By the time a woman finds herself in my waiting room, she has already taken a walk down a long introspective road. It is my personal belief that the abhorrence of abortion expressed by people who place themselves at the barricade in front of the abortion clinics is actually a misplaced horror at women's sexual autonomy. It stands to reason. Women's sexual independence is the thing that men have always wanted to control. A woman who wants to terminate her pregnancy has to make her decision in the context of a culture that shames her, and increasingly, within the constraints of laws that dramatically inconvenience her, they demean her humanity by presuming to know better than she does what her best interests are. They limit her access to clinics, and doctors convey to her false information. The underlying assumption of all the new laws is that women can't be trusted to make their own health decisions. Their doctors can't be trusted to tell them the truth, and scientific knowledge must be subverted in the name of religious truth. And for her part, a woman who wants an abortion must demonstrate superhuman determination to seek it out. And this quote is particularly important. The people who pass new laws concern themselves with fetuses, but these are humans I am caring for. Real people, not merely biological organisms with the potential to become people. Again, science and the law and doctors do not confer personhood upon fetuses. It's just not how that works. He at one point shares in the book about his own sister's unplanned pregnancy and talks about how judgmental he was at that point and calls it the most unchristian thing that he has ever done. And without the money to pay for an abortion, she did carry to term. The antis will hear her story and believe it supports their cause. Prevented by circumstances from obtaining an abortion, a young girl with no resources raised a child. But I will say that one example does not prove a rule. Bringing a child to adulthood is a gamble in the best of cases, and no individual ought to be forced into taking that risk if, after careful reflection, she decides the costs in this instance are too much to bear. The only person who can make this honest calculation is the pregnant person themselves, and once they've done so, we must listen to the inner direction of their inner voice. No legislators or preachers can presume they know better about what the pregnant person should do. He talks about how outrageous it is that this is the only medical issue in which we demonize a woman's right to choose. We would never do that for cancer patients. Hi, okay, look, I'm gonna be honest, it's the next day, and I did put the same shirt on to try to play it off, oh, you know, no difference. Alright, so the question is, where the hell were we? Okay, so he stresses that each person's situation is different and the reasons that they choose to have an abortion are different, and that's up to them ultimately, because nobody knows your variables, your unique set of variables in your life better than you do. And he emphasizes that we need to trust that people can make these decisions for themselves. Your personal beliefs do not get to dictate what other people do. That's just not democracy. He was talking to anti-choice advocates and said, I brought my argument home. If you can agree that certain medical conditions might justify abortion, then how can you exclude social or personal or financial conditions? If abortion is permissible in the case of a fatal fetal anomaly, then why not in the case of a homicidal battering partner on behalf of the pregnant person? Or just a dire lack of resources or drug dependency? How can the state adjudicate the circumstances of a pregnant person's life at all? And Dr. Parker talks about how Christians tend to feel like they have to make this decision for others, and he vehemently disagrees on the basis of giving pregnant people agency. And he also just hates the war of the cultures between pro-life and pro-choice, because they just leave out that they just leave out the pregnant person. Honestly, that person is not allowed to make their decision for themselves, and it's not right. One of the things that infuriates me the most about the abortion wars, as they're called, is the way that the antis have shrouded their case in the language of God, with phrases like pro-life and culture of life. The antis seized the moral high ground nearly 40 years ago, and they retain it to this day because abortion rights activists, the people who have been fighting for the rights of pregnant people, have never mounted a significant religious or moral counter-argument. Never mind that every great justice cause, from abolition to same-sex marriage, has been waged in religious terms in order to influence or inspire the souls of the passive or the undecided. Which makes sense because there are so many Christians who vote based on one issue, the single-issue voters. They'll vote for someone just because they say they are anti-abortion. And a lot of Christians voted for our current president, Donald Trump, simply because he supports Israel, which is a whole nother issue I'm not going to talk about, and is seemingly pro-life. Believing themselves too highbrow or too rationalistic or too scientifically minded to stoop to this level, pro-choice advocates have ignored the evidence and the history. Presuming that religion is a corrupting and divisive force, progressive and humanist people have failed to offer a moral, spiritual, ethical, or religious case for abortion rights, and so have ceded these arguments to their opponents. Meanwhile, the tactics that the antis have used for decades have been so explicitly un-Christian, and I'm not just talking about the murder, arson, bombings, and other terrorist attacks that have stained the anti-abortion movement since its inception, that it seems to me a wonder that any faithful Christian would want any part of them. The Bible does not contain the word abortion anywhere in it. Dr. Parker has even had Christians come to him in need of abortion care, and this is not rare. There have been cases, and these are purely anecdotal, I have no evidence for this, but there have been cases where workers at abortion clinics have said that they had seen somebody protest outside the clinic and then come into the clinic needing abortion care and then go right back outside protesting the same clinic that they had just used for abortion care. Again, that's purely anecdotal. I just want to point out when there's not evidence for something and it's based on word of mouth. I am now thinking of a patient who sought to terminate her pregnancy because she was unmarried, though in a long-term relationship, and the leader of a Christian youth group. Feeling that she could not model appropriate Christian behavior under these circumstances as a pregnant, single Christian woman, she had an abortion instead. I didn't say this to her at the time, but it is how I felt. How much better would it have been to work through her real-life dilemma in an open and honest way for the kids she taught and not default to some rigid understanding of how Christian women ought to behave? A third of American women have had abortions, but a fraction of them are brave enough to stand up and tell their stories. I have found that when women do share their experiences of abortion out loud and with one another, and with the men in their lives, they do so much to push away stigma and shame for themselves and for all people who feel silenced and blamed. Sometimes women, having absorbed the lessons of Christian churches like the one in which I was raised, call the clinic to wonder aloud to anyone who answers the phone asking, "Will God forgive me?" This fear and judgment is what's so prevalent in the culture of anti-choice Christian belief. I think now of someone in my immediate family who told me at one point when they had brought up abortion to me, and they said ultimately the end of the conversation was they said that they were worried how God would judge the entirety of the country because we allowed abortion to be on the books, allowed it to be permissible by law. And I said to them, I don't think that God judges an entire country based on a law that we permit. I think that God has more nuance than that. At the time I was still a Christian, and they said to me, well, I think he does do that. So that's worrisome, to say the least. And also, it made me so sad to think, doesn't God have more understanding? Isn't God capable of seeing different variables? I mean, if I'm capable of seeing them and God is so much bigger than me, then wouldn't God be able to understand the nuance of this? And it's my belief that whatever higher power does exist, if they do exist, then yeah, they do understand the variables of this and they don't see it as cut and dry. Of this, Dr. Parker says, God is love and God does not judge, but God's people can become overly pious and haughty and they can become inflexible. And that's like so encouraging to me because I tend to, I'm not a Christian anymore, but I sometimes do revert back to thinking that the Christian God is in existence, and I get so discouraged thinking that though they say he's a God of love, it doesn't seem that he has much understanding if you look at their beliefs. But reading this encouraged me and made me think that God himself is not overly pious and haughty, just some of his followers. And it can be easy to forget that Christians are not a monolith and that they do not all believe this, especially when the anti-choice Christians are so loud. And pro-choice Christians too feel alienated by these beliefs that they spew upon the rest of us. It can feel very alienating, I'm sure, to not fall in line with this belief system for pro-choice Christians, and I imagine that it can get very lonely depending on who you surround yourself with. He actually talks about this and says, "My inclination to feel on the outside of this sweeping conservative Christian movement had to do, of course, with the environment in which I was raised. The anti-abortion movement was launched and promulgated largely by whites, triggering in me a nausea and a primal loathing that I believe is the reasonable response of someone who grew up among folks who carried with them in their bodies memories of lynchings and the terrorism of the Ku Klux Klan." He also goes over how previously anti-choice beliefs were not conflated with Christianity, and that this really has to do with a cultural shift. As Justice Harry Blackmun so eloquently wrote way back in 1973 in the majority opinion in Roe v. Wade, there is no historical, philosophical, theological, or even scientific consensus on when life begins. So while the modern Roman Catholic hierarchy might regard each instance of fertilization as a sacred event, this belief is not and has never been universal among Christians. 1,000 years ago, it was common for people to believe, as the Greeks did, that fetuses only possessed what they called a vegetable soul up until 40 to 80 days of gestation, at which point God imbued them with a human soul. Even Thomas Aquinas, who established much of what is contemporary Catholic theology, believed that abortion was homicide only after the moment of ensoulment, at 40 to 80 days, 40 days for a boy and 80 for a girl. Weird. Until the rise to national prominence of the moral majority before the presidential election of 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected, life begins at conception was not central to mainstream Protestant belief, and abortion was not explicitly forbidden. In fact, he actually talks about something that I had never heard of before that I am very excited to now know about, which was a coalition of clergy who came together to get pregnant people abortion care should they need it. These brave and righteous religious leaders for reproductive rights, warriors really, had been so widely ignored for decades by the public and the press. As far back as 1967, when abortion was still illegal in New York State, Reverend Howard Moody of Judson Memorial Church in New York City formed the Clergy Consultation Service on Abortion, a kind of underground railroad coalition of Jewish and Christian clerics committed to helping women procure safe abortion care. They were motivated, Reverend Moody said, by their humane concern for the pregnant people who were forced to risk their own lives navigating the underworld of illegal abortion on their own. Like the Good Samaritan, the ministers assumed the legal risk on behalf of these pregnant people because their faith compelled them to provide a population they saw as persecuted and vulnerable. An estimated 450,000 pregnant people called on the Clergy Consultation Service for help in the 6 years before Roe, and the coalition, which started with 21 members, grew to 2,000. 2,000 clergy helping pregnant people. Activism by Moody's group helped propel New York's legislature to legalize abortion in 1970, the first state in the nation to do so. Emboldened by its success, the Clergy Consultation Service then began to help pregnant people from other states travel to New York and obtain safe and legal abortions. And then, breaking with medical establishment, these same clerics proposed the model for the first abortion clinic. Isn't that amazing? Clergy are the reason that abortion clinics exist. Believing that women's privacy and autonomy would be better served if they could get their abortion care in a freestanding clinic instead of a hospital, Moody's group worked with a doctor committed to providing low-cost, quality care, humane treatment, and a willingness to serve the poor in a freestanding place. Women's Services on Upper Manhattan's East Side was the first abortion clinic in the country, and it existed because of clergy. Like, that is the work of people of faith. That's amazing. And I really love this passage by him where he says, "The more I read, the more I understood that I needed a God of transcendence and justice, more than I needed one that enshrined and preserved the Bible's antique patriarchal worldview. Many seem to accept without thinking that to be a Christian is to oppose abortion rights. In my view, the only Christianity that mandates an anti-abortion view is an emotion-based faith, a rigid reading of Scripture that invites no questioning or interpretive consideration. The Bible is not stuck in time, but rather a living, breathing, divinely inspired document, and the God that I believe exists within these pages is big enough and flexible enough and loving enough to accommodate a very different perspective." I just think that's like so beautiful, and it gives me so much hope knowing that Christians like this exist. Dr. Parker and these clergy, because they still exist, believe in the justice of giving pregnant people the care, the medical care that they are asking for, and doing it with compassion. Dr. Parker channels his personal saint, as he calls him, Martin Luther King Jr. A life devoted to science posed no contradiction to my strong Christian faith. Science gives man knowledge, which is power, MLK wrote. Religion gives man wisdom, which is control. The two are not enemies. He put both his love of science in medicine and his Christ-like values to work in tandem to provide what he knows is right, which is to provide health care to people who are asking for it. And that's what abortion is. He talks about how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talks about the Good Samaritan, which is by far the best Bible story if you ask me. Their first thought, the Levite and the priest who did not stop, was fear for themselves. If I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? What made the Good Samaritan good in Dr. King's interpretation was that he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? For the Samaritan, the person in need was a fallen traveler, and for me, it was a pregnant person. It became not, is it right for me as a Christian to perform abortions, but rather, is it right for me as a Christian to refuse to do them? That's pretty freaking revolutionary, and that's what led all those clergy to also provide this care for pregnant people. I'm fine. He quotes the Holocaust survivor, Eli Wiesel. I'm so sorry if I butchered that name. Our lives, he says, no longer belong to us alone. They belong to those who need us desperately. Committed in my effort, which continues to this day, to be true to Dr. King's idea of justice, I do not remember feeling an ounce of remorse or regret at my decision, only sorrow that I hadn't come to it sooner. On that day, I decided to exercise Christ's compassion, not by proxy, but with my own capable hands. It has taken me decades of emotional, spiritual, and intellectual wrestling with my conscience and with my world to get to the place where I am now. I remain a follower of Jesus, and I believe that as an abortion provider, I am doing God's work. I am protecting pregnant people's rights, their human right to decide their futures for themselves and to live their lives as they see fit. As a Christian and as a doctor, I am committed to protecting pregnant people's health. The services we offer should be based on the needs of our patients and not subjected to the religious beliefs of the doctor. I truly wish that I had grown up around this sort of Christianity, because maybe my faith would have turned out differently. Maybe I wouldn't have deconstructed it entirely and ended up agnostic, which I don't feel like I can change at this point. My hope is that more Christians like him will rise up and use their voice, so that the voices of these pro-choice Christians will drown out the loud and wrong voices of the anti-choice Christians. The whole point of God was that he loved you in your brokenness, that he didn't need you to be perfect. That was the miracle. The same understanding informs my approach with my patients. As they feel compelled to explain themselves, to rationalize their abortion decision, they often feel the need to invent a narrative that makes them appear virtuous or that cleans up the details of their circumstances in order to evoke my compassion. When I sense this, I tell them of my understanding, though I keep God out of it. Your need makes you worthy. You are fine the way you are. Talking openly about abortion should be something that happens in church and not suppressed by religious authorities in the interest of preserving their own power. People with uteruses should find healing and understanding in church, not stigma and shame. I don't have this truncated view that life begins exactly here or ends exactly there. Static processes don't resonate with my understanding of God. To say that conception or birth or even death is miraculous does an injustice to God. Only a person lacking a scientific understanding of reproduction would say that God gives life or takes life, or you won't get pregnant unless God makes you pregnant. This idea of God as a meddler is what allows the antis to turn faithful people against themselves, because in their eyes, all decisions, all the meaningful parts of life are God's will or not God's will. Is God really that temperamental and petty? Does God really need all that adoration? God is not human. God is not on the planet. God does not have babies or make babies, people do. As a part of a greater intelligence, as a lover of beauty and creativity, God made the world, and sexual reproduction is a collaborative process between God and humans. In that process, all distinctions disappear. God has no hands but your hands. God has no ability but your ability. That is what the Bible means when it says that you are God's child. The procedure room in an abortion clinic is as sacred as any other space to me, because that's where I am privileged to honor your choice. In this moment, where you need something that I am trained to give you, God is meeting both of us where we are. So that's all that I have. That's all my notes. I hope that you learned something, learned a new perspective. I know I certainly did reading this. I found it very helpful and encouraging and informative. I think I already said that. I'm going to switch over to the part of the video where I interviewed pro-choice Christians and got their personal views on all of this. And just remember that even pro-choice Christians are not a monolith. All of them come from different places and experiences and have their own unique sets of variables that dictate the way that they feel about this. So one might feel different from the other. Some of them might feel differently than Dr. Willie Parker, but what was important to me is to give a voice to many pro-choice Christians, because I think that all of their voices need to be uplifted so that we can drown out the anti-choice Christians who have had their say for far too long. So without further ado, interviews.
Pro-choice means to me that you have the option of doing whatever is best for yourself, your situation, your body, whatever that will entail, obviously. I feel like people tend to think that just because it's my way means that it's the right way, or because it's your way means it's the right way. And I don't think things are ever that black and white. Like,
right.
Just because it's my decision doesn't make it better than your decision. It just makes it my decision, and your decision can be different, and that's your decision. I don't feel like it's just black and white like that.
Pro-choice means being pro doing a uterus having a person being able to do whatever they deem medically safe for their own bodies, which includes the choice of having an abortion or the choice of not having an abortion. It goes both ways. I think that's important, that we have autonomy over our own bodies.
Being pro-choice just means giving people obviously access and the option to get an abortion, and being judgment-free of people if they choose or need to get one, and being understanding that it might not be what they want, but what they need to do for various reasons.
It means that you have a choice with what you do with your body, and no one else has that decision but you. So I am a non-denominational Christian, and I believe that we should, that God loves everyone, and we should love everyone regardless of what choices and decisions they make. And so I believe that kind of coincides with being pro-choice. Love everybody, don't force your opinions on anybody, and yeah.
The fact of what a lot of people tend to focus on when it comes down to faith is this like judgy, hard Bible thumping, like, and while that may be the case, in the Old Testament, it's very like, vengeful, angry, brimstone stuff. But in the New Testament, which in my understanding, my understanding isn't always the correct one, but with my understanding is that after Jesus came back, after his 3 days and stuff, he came back, we were supposed to go off of the New Testament. We're no longer supposed to go off of the Old Testament. So we're supposed to go with the New Testament, and I do feel like the Bible is a living testament in the sense of it changes with its people. There isn't any hardcore proof of that, right. But I do feel like, seen as with the faith, we were born these ways, so as people evolve, the Bible evolves as well. But we're supposed to be understanding and forgiving and tolerant and open-minded, and just because you probably don't agree with something doesn't make it wrong. It just doesn't make it your jam, you know what I mean? Like,
right, yeah.
It's not my thing. It might not be my thing, but maybe it's your thing type of thing.
Right.
And even outside of just Christianity, like, people in general should be more open-minded, should be more tolerant, should be more nicer, should be more open-minded.
Yes.
Like, whenever I disagree with somebody, it's not like I disagree and I dislike you and I disagree with what you stand for. I disagree because I don't understand for whatever reason that may be. Maybe it's my upbringing. Maybe it's my background. Maybe it's my environment. I don't live or walk the same path you do, so I don't understand. So help me understand. And then going forward, I'm like, okay, cool, I understand. I may not like it, but I understand and I'm tolerant of it. What in the Bible says that pro-choice is right? One of my favorite things, one of my favorite quotes in the Bible, a parable in the Bible, is like, you have life and death at the tip of your tongue. Meaning, be careful of what you say. So if God, Jesus, whomever, gave us the choice of following him or not following him, gave us the choice of, I choose this route instead of this route, that's what pro-choice is.
Mm-hmm.
Choosing your own route.
Right.
So if you choose to use the Bible and be like, bah, 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 over the head and stuff like that, you are contradicting yourself because you have that choice.
Right.
You have the choice to follow those words in the Bible. You have the choice not to. And God gave us that choice. So in that case, why are you trying to take away somebody else's choice?
The version of Christianity I adhere to, my personal way I kind of manifest my faith, is in showing everyone kindness and love and understanding. And abortion, I think, is probably the hardest decision an average human being could be expected to make. You might be expected to make harder decisions if you are a military leader or a world leader, but an average everyday human might come to the point where they have to decide whether or not they're going to get an abortion. People with uteruses, obviously not others, but in showing love and understanding to people, I think that extends to abortion, like I was saying, where you have to understand that this is an incredibly hard decision, and this is, they're probably very conflicted on what they're doing. It's probably a horrible decision and horrible thing to live with, that you have to go through it. And so I feel like as a good Christian, I should be there and helping them work through those emotions and through that conflict, and kind of help them bear their burden and not feel worse about what's happening to them in the situation they're in, by interjecting my moral philosophy and what my faith adheres to.
But I think it really goes back to whether or not you personally believe in free will. Where we get the concept of free will is actually a verse from, I think, Genesis, and it's the Cain and Abel story. And it's this very specific word in the Hebrew translation called timshel. And it's actually a really big part of the John Steinbeck East of Eden book. It's actually what the whole book is about, is this one word. In some translations of the Bible, there's a passage that says that you will be righteous, you will do this, you will, it's like a command to not sin. But timshel means thou mayest. And so it's God giving you a choice. It's God telling you, you can not sin, or you can, but it's what opens the doors to free will, for choice, and for redemption later. Like, that's like the whole point. It's really the precursor to the resurrection, really. Like what gives us a chance to be redeemed even when we're all sinners, So it's just it gives us more room to be people, because it's like, what is the point of loving God if it's not choice?
I feel like because Jesus was very open-minded, he was very welcoming and always had open arms, that people should emulate that. Like,
right.
You don't have to go directly off of what it says in the Bible. Like, obviously, take your understanding of it, but you also have to understand that people's understanding could be different.
Right.
My understanding of stuff, you could read the same book, the same exact book, read the same exact words, same exact sentence, and get two totally different understandings of it. And you take so much into things, like you as a person, me being a Black woman born in Los Angeles, raised with open-minded people, smart women, strong women, I take all these things into everything I do.
Right.
Every single thing I do. So anybody who says that they don't go into a book already having like prejudices, that to me, that is incorrect, because you're taking so many things into everything that you do, just off of how you were raised, off of the environment that you were raised, off of the people that you were raised around.
Absolutely.
You are taking they're like baggages. You're taking them into every single thing that you do. So people need to go into any situation. A person, a woman needing abortion for whatever reason, with that understanding of this person walks a different path as I do. That does not mean that their path is wrong. Let me be understanding and open to that, because that's what Jesus would say, and what he would do. He'll be very open-minded and open-armed to be like, we're still people, so I got your back. What's up? Like,
our duty is to love them no matter what, basically. God would want us to love any single person that you come into contact with, and for some people it may be sitting with them while they're in the waiting room to get an abortion. For some people it may be helping them process their decisions for an abortion or adoption, or to keep their baby. For some people it might be running errands for them. It's just loving somebody where they're at right then and there.
Showing understanding and not passing moral judgments, not bringing up quotes that other Christians like to use against abortion, just kind of, reaffirming that, maybe you don't understand it. Maybe this is all part of the Lord's plan. And, again, just showing support, showing love, and understanding that this is incredibly hard, and throwing moral platitudes at people is not going to make that any easier. Yeah, just not being a dick.
Yeah.
For lack of better way to word it.
Well, I think that one of our big failings as just a faith in general, and the whole pro-life thing, period, is you're not actually pro-life. You're anti-abortion. You're not pro-life, because if you were pro-life, you would be giving these women, or women in uterus having people, the medical attention that they desperately need anyway to prevent this situation from happening, instead of treating us like we're second-class citizens and can't make our own decisions. So you have the Catholic Church, who has lately made a lot of changes in this regard, but in the past are pretty notorious for refusing to let their parishioners have take birth control. That's the whole big thing, which that's not good. Yeah, I think that if you want to say that you are for life, then you have to start taking measures before the person falls pregnant, And also, as a person of faith, you have to understand that just because it's a choice you wouldn't make doesn't mean that you get to govern other people's choices.
Right.
Just like you can't force people to believe in God, that you can't force people to have a baby that they cannot have, cannot afford, can't have safely, because the pro-choice, anti-choice thing, it doesn't just fall under unwanted pregnancy just because you had consensual sex and then you fell pregnant. No, I mean, it covers rape victims of incest, very many, other situations of which someone could, end up in the situation. And people that wanted to have the child, but then end up being medically unable. And there are, friggin' Alabama, they want to make you not be able to safely do that. And it's what kind of, what kind of Christian are you if you don't value the life of the living person in front of you? Right. You're sitting there and telling them their life doesn't matter to you?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh. I've never met more judgmental people than a Christian. Like, it's, oh yeah. Oh yeah. They don't have to sit there and defend their stance, you know, or their bigotry, but boy do I have to defend myself and my opinions. But when I challenge them on their opinion, they're like, I'm allowed to think whatever I want. Like, everybody has a difference of opinion. And I'm like, unless it's different from yours. I don't know how many times I've had discussions with somebody and, you know, I just call them out on, like, that's kind of racist, or that's a little bigoted, or that's homophobic, or that's just not a nice thing to say. It's like, well, it's just my opinion. I'm allowed to have that opinion. And I'm like, okay, well, I think abortion should be legal. Like, you're a murderer! Okay. So everybody else's opinion is wrong but yours, and you're the only person that's allowed to have an opinion, unless, you know, I agree with you.
Yeah, I've been told I'm a bad Christian. I'm told that I'm going to go to hell. You know, I've been, you know, told I'm fake and that I'm just pretending. You know, basically anybody who's pro-choice that gets met with these people, you know, you get kind of the same platitudes from them as you're not as good as them, but I get extra hate because I'm somehow disrespecting them by identifying as the same thing they are, even though it's just a question of my interpretation and how faith speaks to me is different than how it speaks to them, but they don't care.
How every other Christian has the word love in it, I really think that they really need to remember that, like, faith is based on love. God is love. God loves us, and we're supposed to love everybody. And you can't hate somebody and love them at the same time.
My perspective is, okay, so as somebody, and I have no problem saying this because I have no shame in my game, as somebody who had abortion at the age of 19, and I didn't think twice about it. I don't regret doing it whatsoever. And it was a horrible situation, and it happened. And I don't regret doing it whatsoever. Yeah. I said that twice. I really do not. But as somebody who I don't regret it at all, I wasn't ready. Like, and I get, I know that most Christians are like the anti-choice people are going to be like, well, you were making grown decisions. You laid down with a man. That's what happened. I get that. I understand. Thank you for the biology. Like, I get it. But what I think those Christians should understand is that my choices are my choices. Your choices are yours. That does not make my choices wrong, and it doesn't make them right either. Like, and me being of the flesh that makes mistakes, and I'm pretty sure you made mistakes, you shouldn't be crucified because of those mistakes. I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there right now. Not all Christians are the same.
Yeah.
Obviously, by this video, not all Christians are the same. We are not cut from the same cloth all the time, okay? Right. Like, at all. There are people who, like myself, who feel like, you know, the Bible is an ever-growing thing. It's a living thing. It evolves with us as people.
Yeah.
And there's people who sit up here and still believe the same thing as, like, you know, you can have slaves and you feed them last. Yeah. Because it says that in the Bible. There are understandings to that. And being a Christian is terrifying sometimes. Being a believer is terrifying because people automatically look at you and be like, you're judging me automatically. Yeah. Just because you're a believer, you're judging me. And that's not the case at all.
Right. I'm
very pro-choice. I'm an ally. I'm bisexual myself. Like, same. You can have these two, and I'm a chemistry major. I'm a scientist. Like, all these things are contradicting itself. It happens. Yeah. And it's okay. And that's okay. What makes it wrong? Just because you say it's wrong, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I am personally very big as a Christian on the New Testament, like I've been talking about themes of love, forgiveness, understanding, and also I think the driving idea in Christianity is that no one is perfect, and you've committed your own sins and broken rules of Christianity yourself. You know, if you go back to the Old Testament, there are tons and tons of things, mixed fabrics, eating pork, all of that stuff. And so I think when you start throwing verses against things you don't like, you are missing the whole point of Jesus' sacrifice, which is that we're all sinners, and you should focus on being good and trying to reduce your own sins before you start judging other people. And also, it's not your place to judge God's other creations, it's God's. And God might have a plan that somehow involves what that person's going through. And so by interjecting your interpretation of God's word, you might be blocking God's plan. And again, you're missing Jesus's whole point of don't point fingers at other people. Look into what you can be and look into how you can help other people and stop being judgmental.
Grace, you know, the ability to look outside of themselves. Like, a lot of people, just people, period, I've noticed since this whole pandemic has started, not just noticing, I've been noticing, but they just don't look outside their self. Like, not everything is about you, and not everything is about the choices you would make. The choices you would make, I fully support your choice. But you get to choose for the person next to you. The Bible doesn't tell you that you get to do that. You don't get to enact laws that force people to believe the same way that you do, or they go to jail. I wish they were actually pro-life.
Yeah.
Like, I wish you actually cared about my life more than you care about my reproduction. Like, I wish that you cared more about just people in general. I wish that you were actually pro-life and that you actually knew what that meant. Like, instead of putting people in situations like the laws that you enact and just this system that is our government and world that puts people in a situation that they feel like they don't have another choice.
That I'm there for them. If they want to talk about their choices, if they want someone to hold their hand before or after, if they want someone to pray with, if they need Bible verses, I don't know. I'll be there for them.
That's awesome. That's a good answer.
You're going to look back on today, on yesterday, and you're going to look back on it a month or 2 months from now and be like, I got through it. You will get through it.
Just first and foremost, not even just a question of faith, but just be kind to yourself. Understand that what you're going through is incredibly difficult, and you're not the first person, you won't be the last person, but that doesn't make it any easier for you. And you just got to accept that this is hard, and you should talk to as many people as you feel comfortable and safe talking to about it. And if anyone tries to tell you you are going to hell or that you're a bad Christian or anything like that, understand that this God has a plan for everyone, and you might not understand it now, but somehow what you're going through, it should make sense. And as I said, it's going to be confusing, it's going to be hard, but take it one step at a time. Don't let people talk you out of what you feel is the right decision for you, because they're not the ones making the decision. You are, and it's your life, and just do what you need to.
Really depends on their circumstance and why they need it and all of that. And because I'm never going to tell somebody to go against their morals and their faith. If your morals and your faith and really tell you in your heart this is not the right thing, then I would tell you, like, just me personally, like, I'll help you find adoption agencies. I'll help you figure out how to go to the doctor. I'll help you if you really don't want to do this. But if you want to do this, if this is your choice, you have every right to make that choice. It is your body. And if you're worried that God won't forgive you, then you just got to read the New Testament. That's what it's all about. Like, that's why Jesus died on the cross, is to forgive our sins. And there is none of us are irredeemable. You know, none of us are irredeemable. And I think God knows your heart. I think he understands your heart probably better than you do. He understands your circumstances. And if there is a way forward that doesn't include that, he'll help you find a way. And if not, then there's your choice. You know, you do what you got to do. And God will be there. He'll meet you where you are.
Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all of my interviewees. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the time that you took to answer questions for me and for the audience of whoever's watching this. I really appreciate everyone who supports this channel and this particular series of videos that I do. And yeah, thank you so much. Leave your comments down below, like if you feel like it, subscribe if you want, and I will see you next time. Bye!